Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on barrier-free mobility, brought to you by Ontario Centre of Innovation, Ontario's Autonomous Vehicle Innovation Network, short as AVIN, and General Motors Canada. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Shireen Abdelhamid. I'm the technical advisor of AVIN and the moderator of this webinar. In case you do not know much about AVIN, AVIN is the Government of Ontario's initiative to support the development, commercialization, and deployment of automotive technologies and smart mobility solutions in the province. We offer multiple programs and resources that you can check out on our website, avinhub.ca. As part of our education and awareness activities, we run webinars presented by experts in the automotive and mobility industry. And it's a great pleasure to have in today's webinar Suzette Malek and Dr. Ala Khamis from GM. We will start with Suzette Malek, who will walk us through key insights across barrier-free mobility research and opportunities to develop innovative solutions to provide better access and equity for mobility. After that, we will move to Dr. Ala Khamis, who will talk about a very exciting student competition AVIN is running in partnership with GM Canada to solicit innovative proposals for barrier-free mobility solutions. At the end, we will have a Q&A session where you can ask questions to both Suzette and Ala. So I encourage you to post your questions in the Q&A section of Zoom at any time during the webinar. You do not have to wait until the end, and the presenters will try to answer as many of them as possible in the Q&A session at the end. So let's start with the first part of the webinar, the presentation by Suzette Malek. Suzette Malek is a research manager for global societal trends and innovation insights at General Motors. Suzette has an engineering and business background with extensive experience in global consumer research and future trends exploration. She created GM's Global Trends Network as a channel to provide global trends information and insights to various global teams working on advanced projects. Suzette has also developed a global research process for testing advanced ideas and concepts with consumers. Her most recent work centers around the future of mobility, especially in the areas of autonomous, smart mobility for cities, sustainability, inclusive barrier-free mobility, and the future of aerial mobility. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Suzette.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, I will share my screen. Oh, looks like it says cannot share. There we go. Okay, let me try that. Okay, can you all see my screen now?
We can, yeah, go ahead, exactly.
Okay, great. Let me try and get this out of the way. I don't know if you can see that part anyways. Okay, now it looks good. All right, thank you so much. Yes, I'm Suzette Malek from GM's Global Market Research Organization, and I'm very pleased today to present to you our latest insights on what we refer to as barrier-free mobility. And we'll be very excited if you do join the student project and see what kind of ideas and solutions you can all come up with. It's been a journey that we've been on for quite a while now in terms of how do we develop our future vehicles, especially as we look towards the future of electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and even shared services, in a way to make sure that our development of the future of mobility is accessible to all and is barrier-free. And so hopefully many of you have seen GM's latest messaging and marketing around the campaign we call Everybody In, so that we invite everyone to be a part of the future of mobility, and that no one is left behind, especially in terms of people with accessibility issues. So some of the stats that we've been diving deep into in our trend analysis really brings together why this is such an important project and such an important topic. So when you think about people with accessibility issues, you look at stats like 26% of the US population have a disability and 20% of the global population. And you can see the range of different types of issues, whether it be physical, people in a wheelchair, walking issues, hearing, visibility, cognitive, etc. And then you also take into consideration one of the biggest global megatrends that we do a lot of research on, which is the aging population, which is actually set to double to 1.5 billion globally by 2050. And we referred to some of the UN stats to see that growth across a number of different countries. And if that wasn't enough, you also think about people who may have a temporary disability. You know, if you break your leg or you have a sore knee or something that might happen to you, also creates accessibility issues during that time frame, especially as it relates to mobility in vehicles. Also, thinking about caregivers, you know, in our ethnographic research that we'll talk quite a bit about, we did a lot of research with caregivers, whether you're a professional caregiver or whether you're a family member or a friend who takes care of, for example, an adult who's taking care of their elderly parents, or a parent who's taking care of a child who has mobility issues. And so this is not by any means a niche market, and it's a really important growing area for us to continue to do research on and develop potential solutions for. So in addition to our own barrier-free mobility research, you're going to hear me talk quite a bit about our external relationships, and actually that's a great opportunity for you as students to access a lot of the research that we actually have been able to publish publicly. So I'll give you a lot of links that you can utilize as well. So GM particularly, we've been invited to participate, discuss, and explore, and we've done actually external workshops and are now working on further discussions and presentations with a number of external organizations that are really focused in on this area. I myself am located in the US, so a lot of these are US references, but it is a very obviously global issue and a lot of external additional sites you can access. We're a part of the Autonomous Vehicle Alliance, which is a research consortium, which actually really kicked off this barrier-free research. And then we've also built relationships with others like the US Department of Transportation, the Intelligent Transportation Society, the US Access Board, MCity out of University of Michigan, all of which are doing a lot of additional research and focus in on this topic. So a number of us got together and recently created a research consortium around this topic, and we called it Accessible and Barrier-Free Research. And over the last year, we've really been engaged in diving deep into this topic, and that's what I'm going to present the research insights from this project for you today. There were actually 3 phases of the research. We really started off with a literature review. We had a supplier association summarize for us previous studies, white papers, all of the topics and insights that we could gather on this topic to really guide us towards what we wanted to dive deep into in our research. Phase 2 then was one-on-one expert interviews with key industry stakeholders from a wide range of different experts in this area, and I'll show you those in a moment. And then, of course, we did ethnographic research with targeted consumers. So did a lot of research, interviews, observation research with direct consumers who have different varying issues, whether it be wheelchair users, blind, hearing issues, etc. And then we also did a series of journey mapping as well to really understand what it was like for a day in the life of these consumers and what issues they really do have when it comes to mobility. I mentioned earlier, a lot of this research, not all of it, but a lot of it, you can actually access externally. I give you a link here because we actually, in this research consortium, sponsored a series of presentations and external workshops, and some of it that was recorded. So if you're interested in more information, check out this link. All right, so what does it mean to be barrier-free? When we started this project, we really wanted to make sure we understood all different aspects when it comes to accessibility and what were the key barriers to providing accessible mobility. So of course, the first aspect is the physical limitations, especially with people with disabilities, and we're going to talk a lot about the physical limitations, but there are other things to consider as well, whether it be cost barriers, you know, how expensive are our vehicles and other forms of transportation becoming, including ride hailing as well. Coverage and access issues, that's a big one. When we do a lot of research with city planners, you know, they have a lot of great concern towards making sure that all forms of mobility are accessible to all, especially people in low-income areas or on the outskirts of cities. So coverage and access is a big issue as well. Technical limitations, of course, we're adding more and more technology to the vehicle, so we want to make sure those are designed in a way that are easy to use for all. And then even design limitations, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. So I put together just a brief summary of each of these phases and what some of the key insights were from those phases. So that's what I'll share with you today. So beginning with the phase one, which was the literature review, it really brought to life how important mobility is as it creates independence for people. You know, if you talk about how do you improve access to education, or how do you improve access to jobs and the ability to have, you know, far-ranging jobs and be able to have access to those jobs and be there on time, it all relates back to mobility and making sure that mobility is accessible and affordable. The other interesting thing that came out of the research was thinking about the total trip. So a piece of the trip from start to finish must be accessible. You know, if there's even one element of the trip journey that's not accessible, it creates an issue for the entire journey. So identifying gaps in services and using the complete trip philosophy can help identify and address barriers. Leveraging technology to identify accessible and inaccessible routes and issues can also help users with disabilities to safely and efficiently reach their destinations. We talked about evolving technologies and services. You know, the more that we transform the future of mobility and the transportation ecosystems, the more that we do have to, again, also think about connectivity and mobile applications. And even as far as we are starting to further develop semi-autonomous and fully autonomous vehicles, it's so important to make sure that those are designed in a way that is accessible. Automobile manufacturers should seek feedback and involvement from the full range of potential users and experts. You know, it's again, the literature review, the phase one really brought to light for us how important it is to continue to do this type of research to really highlight the unique needs and wants of different varying consumers in this range of accessibility. And again, use that as inspiration for innovation and opportunities. Identifying potential biases. You know, biases is a really interesting topic. It's really important to be aware of any biases that we do have as it relates to the typical types of consumers that we target or think about or do research on. So it's really important to really dive deep into understanding the perspectives from that consumer's voice and to, you know, break down those barriers and understand their needs and understand their unmet needs. Mobility on demand. Mobility on demand is, of course, such a growth area for the whole industry, whether you think about ride hailing or the future of shared autonomous vehicles. It's so important that as we continue to develop mobility services, it's done in a way that, again, is thought of and thoughtful towards accessibility. And then the updates to curb management policy. So what's also interesting, you'll hear us talk more about, is the idea that it's not just about the product itself, the physical aspect of mobility, but the infrastructure around it, the ecosystem. And that relates to, you know, physical infrastructure in cities and other areas like curbs, like drop-off pickup zones, and even entrances and exits to buildings and other aspects of that of infrastructure. So those are some of the key insights from phase one. Let me talk a little bit more about some of the things that I mentioned. So the complete trip is really, really important for us, and we're doing a lot of journey mapping, where, as I mentioned, we want to understand from the very start, and often that start is in their homes, or, you know, when they're planning a trip, throughout the entire journey, of course, including the transportation, the mobility itself, and then even post mobility, as I said, maybe you're being dropped off and entering into a building. So it's so important when we're thinking about accessibility and designing barrier-free mobility, we think about that complete trip. So accessibility from origin to destination, thinking about the trip planning, the travel to mobility mode, and that could be any form of mobility, by the way. It's not just owned vehicles, but as we've been talking about, shared vehicles, future of autonomous vehicles, and even mass transit. Then, of course, also think about vehicle entry, egress, boarding, offboarding, stops and transfers, and certainly finally travel to the final destination, the last few feet even, as you exit a vehicle or a mobility form that you're using, and then getting to your final destination. So if even one link is inaccessible, then the access to the entire trip is broken. So that's why journey mapping is such an important process for us. I mentioned phase two. We did a series of expert interviews, and this gives you an idea of some of the experts that we interviewed. So we talked to folks from the American Council of the Blind and ADA, disability advocates, and even some of the startups and others, companies and experts that are focused in on particularly accessibility and barrier-free mobility. And then we also in phase three did a series of end user ethnographies and observation events. We've actually since done many more. But of course, we were trying to really understand a day in the life of everyone, as I mentioned, from wheelchair users to people with hearing issues, cognitive issues, even visual issues, because there are a lot of folks that, as we learned, may even be, quote, legally blind, but can still drive and still have a driver's license through corrective adaptions. And so it's really important for us to understand that full range of consumers and what their needs and wants are. So all of this really came together in terms of overall identifying 3 key areas of opportunities out of the full barrier-free mobility research. A lot of really detailed insights into each of these areas, but it's really helped us to sort of frame where we're going with our innovations and our brainstorming. So the first opportunity is what we called merging the physical world with digital wayfinding tools. So it's, as we said, even way prior to getting into a form of mobility, it's the entire trip planning. It's the personalization of the mobility experience, making sure that you're provided choices that meet your particular needs and understand the needs that you have, whether you're in a wheelchair or you have hearing issues or whatever it might be. The importance of audio cues, the access to real-time information, on-demand booking, as we mentioned, and wayfinding for curbs and sidewalks and entrances and exits. So this entire upfront part of the journey experience. The second opportunity is really understanding how can universal design language impact the future of mobility. This really gets into the core aspects of the products that we develop. So thinking about the vehicle interior features, zero entry became a really important topic for us, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, the entry and exiting of a vehicle. In fact, we learned and have some great video clips of people talking about especially among wheelchair users, once they're in the vehicle and can drive, that's not the problem for them in many cases, because of course, many of the vehicles can be adapted for wheelchair use, hand controls, things like that exist. The problem still is actually getting in and out of the vehicle. So zero entry, barrier-free entry exit is one of the key areas we've been doing a lot of focus on, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. Head clearance, vehicle design cues. And again, just embracing the idea that that you can utilize universal design principles to really understand the consumer needs and do it and develop ideas and solutions, do it in a way that actually ends up improving everybody's lives. As you improve, for example, entry egress or visibility or even grip assistance, you can do it in a way that actually ends up being a solution that works for everybody and is appealing towards everybody. And then the third opportunity, as we've been mentioning, is this idea of coordination of design languages between vehicles and infrastructure. So that's where our external relationships have become so important, because of course we don't, as General Motors, really control the infrastructure as much, but we can help influence, we can help have conversations to really help further improve, whether it be the future of drop-off pickup zones or curbs sizes, and really thinking about how our vehicles and our future of mobility solutions interact with the infrastructure. So just a couple other mentions about some of the things, and I'm hoping you don't see that bar that's on the top of my screen because it's really bugging me, but I don't seem to be able to get it to go away. So just giving you a few more details on some of the things that I mentioned. We talked about merging the physical world with the digital wayfinding tools. So this idea keeps coming up of an integrated multimodal trip planning and payment system. So it's, there's a lot of apps that exist today, no doubt, whether it be Waze or others that help people really plan out their trips and pick the type of mobility solution. But often those services are really focused in on finding the fastest path or finding the fastest route. And there's so much more to be gained by connecting these types of apps to other types of information that can actually help people create a trip that is the safest route or the most accessible route. Making sure, for example, in the future of autonomous vehicles, that the autonomous vehicle drops you off at the right door entrance that is accessible for whatever your needs are, or even just takes again into consideration any particular unmet needs that you have. So this idea of a truly integrated trip planning and payment platform is certainly an area of opportunity, and it can be done in a way that is through private and public partnerships, right? We have to all connect our data, whether it be public data or even data from vehicles, as we continue to have advanced technologies added to our vehicles. I mentioned this idea of, again, using universal design language to have an impact on the future of mobility. So in particular, we've been spending a lot of time, as you can imagine, on the vehicle design aspects. And again, whether it be vehicles of the near term, physical vehicles, vehicles that you purchase and own, or our future of our electric vehicles, or even further out thinking about the future of autonomous vehicles, especially shared autonomous vehicles. So again, entry, egress, and flexible seating and grab assistance for easy maneuverability are some of the things that keep coming up. I'll actually show you a summary in a second about what were the top key areas of improvement needed for the physical aspects of mobility. But it also brought up an interesting quote and note that came out of this research, is the idea of, again, understanding what a day in the life of these types of consumers live. And one interesting aspect, for example, came up is that when people with limited abilities travels with other people, they're often separated. If you're in a wheelchair, if you're lucky to find a vehicle, whether it be a bus or mass transit or a shared service that does provide wheelchair accessibility, it's often separated from the rest of the seating. So it's another really interesting insight to think about, providing not only mobility that's accessible, but also really understands their full needs and wants, who they're traveling with, where they want to be, and not be separated and not be removed in a way that does not allow them to feel dignified and have dignified transportation. So that really brings us to the top key consumer needs that we've identified in all of this research, areas of vehicles to really focus in on in terms of developing future innovations and future insights. And again, these areas could be applied towards owned vehicles, towards the future of mobility, and even shared vehicles as well. So as I keep mentioning entry egress, literally if I had to pick one, that's probably the top one, because it's talked about so much in all of our interviews, creating this barrier-free, zero entry, seamless transition into our vehicles and our mobility solutions. But also think about assistance such as grab handles and cargo lifts and other things that can assist these consumers with their needs and what they might be carrying with them. Seating, easy to get in and out of, but also feeling secured and comfort once inside the mobility transportation form. Storage and cargo, better access, no liftover for small and large items. When you think about something as simple as our vehicles today and our cargo area, lifting, whether it be a wheelchair or even something that you're bringing with you in and out of our vehicles, there's so much area of opportunity to improve that. Vehicles today, especially SUVs, are getting higher and higher off the ground, which improves visibility, but it does create issues for access and liftover. And then speaking of which, visibility. Visibility, of course, is always an area ripe for innovation and new ideas. Better visibility, no obstructions, certainly help with night vision, especially for aging populations whose vision is starting to not be as what it used to be. Safety and security. What came up a lot in the research is thinking about lighting and security features, and how vulnerable many of these consumers feel, especially at night. So a lot of ideas and solutions could be ideated there. Information and displays. This is such a huge topic, whether it be inside the vehicle or, even as we talked about trip planning, mobility apps, they all need to be done in a way that also is thought about in terms of accessibility, especially when you think about, the font sizes that we use or the contrast, or the colors. We did some interviews, for example, with people who are colorblind, and our industry does tend to use colors like red and green a lot, especially to indicate things. And those are some of the colors that have a high percentage of people who are colorblind can't see. So thinking about accessibility as it relates to information and displays is another area of opportunity. And then all of it leads to something I just mentioned, which is this idea of dignity. Can we design our mobility solutions and features in a way that provide appeal and provide dignity to all, so that they are not felt left out, that we truly are being inclusive and barrier free? So a couple other points I wanted to bring up is first this idea that the aging populations and how important, as you saw early on in terms of the size of how many people globally will be 65 and older. It's really the idea that people are living longer, they're staying healthier longer, but they of course do still have physical issues. One interesting aspect that we identified in the research is when you really look at and you do observational research with someone who is aging, they don't get in a vehicle the way we all typically do, and probably don't even think about it. If you are a very young and able-bodied person, when you enter a vehicle, you lift your leg up and you get in to the vehicle. You lift and kind of scoot in from a sideways into the vehicle. As you age, it becomes an increasing issue for you to be able to lift your leg because you become very unbalanced and can't do that. Also with hip issues and other things like that. So they tend to do what we call the butt flop method. They tend to turn around, and actually there are doctors. There's a great video link I put here. There are doctors that actually teach this method to people who are aging as a way to make sure that you don't fall. So they sort of turn around and they plop into the vehicle, and then they swing their legs in. So this is a real, again, area of opportunity for us to think about, how do we do better? How do we do better in terms of that lift over, or the seating? Maybe the seating can come out and approach and make it easier, or even certain in terms of head clearance as you think about as they're entering in the vehicle. And then we also did a lot of observation research with people who are in a wheelchair. And so this is another great YouTube video to see for yourselves what we observed a lot in our observation research. It really relates again to this idea of bias. If you're not in a wheelchair yourself, or you don't know somebody who's in a wheelchair, you really underestimate how independent they are already today. Many of these buy and own a vehicle. They have it adapted with hand controls. But in many cases, they don't even have wheelchair ramps or things like that. Some of them do, of course, modify their vehicles in the aftermarket to have those types of things added as well. But here's a great example of someone who owns a very traditional vehicle, has hand controls. As he approaches the front door, he transfers himself into the driver's seat. And then he, in this case, manual wheelchair, folds, takes the wheels off, puts them into the vehicle, folds the wheelchair down, and transfers the wheelchair across his body into, some of them put it into the front seat, some of them put it into the rear seat, close their door and drive away. And as these folks are driving around in the world, you wouldn't even know that they're in the wheelchair. They're very independent, they're very able-bodied, and just amazing folks to interview. But obviously, again, we look at this as an area of opportunity. How do we do better in terms of that entry egress, in terms of the storage? How do we make it easier? We've talked maybe about even, are there things we can do in what we call the B pillar area, that area that's right behind him, to make sure that we increase the accessibility of our vehicles. And then as we talked about physical design cues or the vehicle design cues. So as I mentioned, thinking about the lighting, the materials, the colors that we use, especially in our displays and our information screens, taking into consideration people who are colorblind or have vision issues, whether it be font sizes or even language issues. So all of this, again, is added to the idea of doing better in terms of making our vehicles more accessible. And then finally, as we talked about, the phase 3 was this coordination of design languages between vehicles and infrastructure. So in this case, again, we think a lot about ground clearance disparities, the difference between where the vehicles are at, whether again, it's a full vehicle or a bus or shared autonomous vehicle, where that vehicle rises to where the curb height is. And how do we get that to match up as much as possible to create this zero entry? So there is no lift over if you have walking issues, or even for someone who's in a wheelchair can just smoothly move into the vehicles. We think about limited sidewalk availability. The sidewalk and the curb, if you will, is getting busier and busier. When you think about ride hailing, people dropping off, picking up, mass transit, and now even look at the future of commercial and how many new innovations are happening in terms of innovative commercial vehicles that are out there, things that are dropping off the Amazon packages and things like that. So the curb is getting busier and busier. So how can we work with departments of transportations and others to really think about that infrastructure to create barrier-free areas? And then finally, again, we really have embraced the idea of universal design, using the different principles that come out of the research on universal design in a way about thinking of these improvements and doing it in a way that actually ends up solving solutions for others that may not even be articulating it as much as these types of consumers are. I love this quote, which is, the biggest issue overall is getting away from thinking about accessibility as being something targeted to a very specific group and getting to solving it as a more of a universal application. So in other words, you don't need to create a very unique or different or targeted solution, but rather create a solution that ends up being appealing towards a wider audience, even if you're not appealing towards everybody literally, but you're certainly increasing the accessibility and you're developing it in a way that's innovative and marketable towards a wide range of consumers. So I leave you with, if you haven't seen before, hopefully as students, you've seen the different principles of universal design, but it's and a link for that as well comes out of the university world. Really, really interesting research and different aspects to think about, whether it be equitable use, flexibility in use, intuitiveness, tolerance for error, low physical effort, and then again, always thinking about that relationships between size and space and approach and use. And for us, of course, again, it relates a lot to this entry egress area of opportunity. All right. So with that, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague Ala, and then we're going to take questions and any comments for you after he speaks as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Suzette. Great work, and thank you for the great presentation, insights that you shared with us, and the resources as well that you shared with us today. And it's now time to move to Dr. Ala Khamis, who will talk about the joint student competition brought by AVIN and General Motors Canada to the post-secondary students in Ontario. The theme and goal of this competition is reaching zero barrier mobility. Dr. Ala Khamis is an AI and smart mobility technical leader at General Motors Canada. Excuse me. And he's also smart mobility sessional lecturer at the University of Toronto, an adjunct professor at Ontario Tech University and Nile University, and an affiliate member of Center of Pattern Analysis and Machine Intelligence at University of Waterloo. He has more than 140 publications that include books, technical reports, and scientific papers in top journals and international conferences. He also filed 14 US patents. Before I hand it over to Ala, I'd like to remind you all to post your questions for both Suzette and Ala in the Q&A section of Zoom, and Ala will moderate a Q&A session after talking about the student competition. Without further ado, over to you, Dr. Ala.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Shireen. I would like also to thank Suzette for the very informative and very interesting talk, and also for sharing these very useful research insights about mobility barriers. And actually, this was like the motive behind the competition we are organizing in collaboration with AVIN, is to raise awareness about these mobility barriers and also to motivate the students to think about user-centric solution to handle these barriers. Can you go to the next slide, please? So we have established this student competition entitled Accessible Mobility Towards Zero Barrier Mobility. And as I mentioned, the goal is to raise awareness about the different mobility barriers that face people with disabilities and also elderly in their daily life when they move, and also to motivate the students to think about user-centric solution to solve this or to handle these mobility barriers. And as Suzette mentioned, we are talking about very big, large population of people with disability around the world, and also Canada is not an exception, and especially for the aging population. As you know, like people with disability represent the world's largest minority, and actually the only minority group that any one of us can become a member at any time. And if we talk about the aging population, also aging population is rapidly increasing. Here in Canada, the percentage of the elderly over age of 85 years, like will reach 23% of the whole population of Canada by 2030. That's why we need to think about how we can use user-centric technology to accommodate the need of the people with disability and elderly in order to achieve inclusive and accessible and also independent mobility. As you may heard from also Suzette, GM has a new vision like called everybody in, and at GM we aspire to be the most inclusive company in the world, and this inclusion actually extend beyond GM workers to include also our products and also our way we are interacting with the ecosystem. So can you go to the next slide, please? So here we are, well, the challenges about using like is around the design thinking question. How might we use user-centric technologies to achieve accessible mobility? And the idea here is to try to put yourself in the shoes of a person with disability and an elderly, and think about what kind of barriers those people are facing and how we can use technology to solve this problem. So the idea here is to not follow technology push kind of approach, but rather is like try to think customer and use user-driven approach in order to create or to propose a solution that would be acceptable and highly appreciated by those people. And in order to cover as much as we can in terms of different types of disabilities and also aging problem, we have like four tracks in this competition. The first track, as you can see here, is addressing the question. Everything is around the design thinking question, how might we do something? So the first track will be handling the question, how might we help elderly and people with mobility impairment? So the focus here is the mobility impairment. And the second track will be focusing on how we can help people with vision impairment. And there are many people actually around us. Also, they are facing a lot of problems to be independent and to move while they have a problem with the vision. And the third track will be focusing on hearing impaired individuals. And like in many countries, including North America, people with hearing impairment are allowed to drive. And imagine somebody with hearing impairment, how can he be aware about the situation and the environment, the sound around them, and how we can move safely without any problem. So think about a person with hearing impairment and driving a car or moving from an origin to a destination. What would be the barriers he may be facing through this trip, and how we can use user-centric technology to mitigate any problem or to handle these barriers. The fourth track is focusing on how might we help cognitively impaired and people with intellectual disability also to handle any kind of mobility barriers they may be facing in their daily life. Can you go to the next slide, please? So here we listed here the important dates. We start to announce this competition in September 20th, and there is educational part of this competition. As I mentioned, one of the objectives is to raise awareness about the different mobility variants and the role of the technology to handle this. That's why we have a website with a rich amount of material, and also the webinar provided today by Suzette is one of part of this kind of to achieve this goal. And we set the deadline to register to be November 1st, and we have a registration link available here and on the website of the competition as well. And we are expecting to receive a solution proposal by November 15th. And the solution proposal is mainly a short technical report and 3 to 4 minutes video, where each team can talk about what they are what they are proposing and what kind of mobility barriers they are addressing, and what kind of user-centric solutions they are proposing. The technical presentation of the finalists after evaluation, and also we have like very detailed evaluation criteria available, will be available soon in the website, will be in November 25th, which is the final day of the competition, and also we'll have the result announcement and the closing ceremony in the same day in November 25th. That's it about the competition, and if you have any questions, please post them on the chat panel, and we are happy to answer any question related to the webinar or the material presented by Suzette or related to this competition. Thank you. Do you have any questions? I think I can try to access the chat.
Yeah, we have three. Yeah, Dr. Ala, we have three questions for Suzette so far.
So yeah, the first question is, please, can we get the slides today for the registration? I think if you are talking about Suzette's slide, Suzette, can you answer this question? Will you be able to share the slide with the attendees?
Yes, definitely. Okay. I think what I shared today, it can definitely be shared with
and
with
for
the
slide,
project.
like just
and then I'll actually post in the chat even the link to the external link I mentioned that you can access even more details of what's been shared publicly.
Great. Okay, so we're gonna post the slide on the competition website, and also we have like many other materials, and all the details will be available on the website of the competition. Second question here, yeah, so I think already Shireen posted the website of the competition.
Yeah.
And another question from Muhammad Yad, he is asking, does visually impaired include person with complete vision loss or partial vision loss? I think yes, yeah, this include different kind of vision impairment, including blind people or partial loss of vision. So the answer is yes.
And yeah, Dr. Ala, there are 3 open questions in the Q&A section, if you can kindly get them.
Okay. I'm looking at the chat. Can you?
No, they are not in the chat. They are in the Q&A.
Do you have access to it? Can you?
Sure. So I can, yeah, I can take over. Sure. So there are a question to Suzette asking about, or saying, there are barriers from cognitive mental health challenges included in the work you are looking at?
Yes, for sure. Cognitive is definitely one of the key areas. Especially reference, and I just put the link in the chat, the literature review, because there were some great summaries. As you can imagine, it's an area that's studied quite often. So there's some great summary in that literature review on some of the key issues. And then one other thing that comes to mind when I think about cognitive issues is, again, a lot of it relates back to the caregivers as well. So sometimes your target customer is as much the user as it is the caregiver of that person as well, especially if it's a parent or even a professional caregiver of somebody with cognitive issues. But yeah, absolutely. The more that we can help people, again, it always comes back to independence, right? The more that we can help people maintain their independence and then therefore access to things out in the world, including jobs, is an amazing opportunity.
Awesome. Another question, what specific insights do the information, data, or figures reveal from end user interviews? And what were the most requested features or functions the end user are expecting?
Yeah, I think it comes back to that one summary slide I was showing of some of the, especially as it relates to the physical aspects of the vehicles or mobility solutions, some of those key areas I was talking about as it relates to entry, egress, and seating and cargo and all of those areas. But yeah, again, it really just comes back to, being thoughtful in our designs to make sure that we are thinking about their needs and wants, and again, designing it in a way that makes it accessible. Like I said, ironically for us, especially for vehicles that you drive, the driving turns out, the least of their problem, right? Because we have solutions for that today. It was more all the other aspects of entry, egress, and storage. And again, as we add more and more technology to our vehicles, making sure that technology is designed to be inclusive too, whether it be the screens and the displays or the, the apps themselves. So it was really interesting for us to understand, the whole trip, and again, the whole ecosystem around the actual part of, whether you're physically driving or not. And then certainly in the future, we do obviously do a lot of work on the future of autonomous vehicles and how can, those really open up the world of mobility to even further for somebody who may not be able to drive. And so, clearly looking at the future of autonomous vehicles as it relates to accessibility as well.
And the last question we have here is, how about text-to-speech output for onboard displays?
Yeah, text to speech is definitely an area of opportunity. It's getting better. Of course, as anyone who's used any sort of voice system, whether it's in vehicles or your phone or whatever it might be, it's certainly not perfect, but it's getting better. That's for sure, and it's certainly an area of opportunity. But we also want to be careful that that's not the only solution, because of course there are some people, especially if you're deaf and can't speak or have speech patterns that create other issues of being able to use that technology. So always thinking about, ways in which that can be utilized to improve accessibility, but not just be the only solution as well.
Okay, awesome. There is a question someone is asking, if alumni can join the competition. Unfortunately not. It's open only for currently enrolled students in post-secondary institutions, universities, and colleges in Ontario. But we will also have a final event for the competition that it's open to everyone to join, to just attend the pitches of the finalists of the competition and some other presentations we will have from experts in the field as well. So this will be open to everyone, and we're going to announce it soon on our social media. And also, if you are registered for the AVIN newsletter, you will get an invitation to this event. It is on November 25th. I don't see any more questions. I can wait for just one more minute in case we get one. Oh, there is one in the chat here. The question is last mile delivery, for example, food, grocery, drug, for people with disabilities using autonomous vehicles, robots, a good idea for this project?
I'll let you tell me if you feel that's in or
yeah.
out, but I do, right? Like this is certainly an area of opportunity. Go ahead.
Also, as opportunity, if you think about the delivery driver, like being a disabled person, right? So we have here the delivery driver and the recipient, right? So we can think about what last mile delivery, especially contactless delivery, can help, and also how inclusive mobility can help the delivery driver with some sort of disability to be independent and also to gain an income, and to empower him or her economically by enabling him to work without any problem. Yeah, this would be a good idea as well.
Yeah, it's a great topic. Ala and I actually talk about this a lot lately about, there's the idea of bringing the person to, to the grocery store, to a job, or to medical care, but it's also an opportunity to think about the reverse, right? If we can't get them to where they need to be, then can we bring what they need to them? And that's what you're really thinking about and bringing up. And it's absolutely a great opportunity, especially as it relates to the future of delivery.
Absolutely.
Yeah, especially if you think about like any kind of abnormal situation like pandemic
Yeah.
similar to COVID-19 pandemic
Yes.
or any natural or human-made disasters where accessibility would be an issue to deliver food and drug, right? So
Exactly. Yeah, contactless delivery has been like on rise since the pandemic started.
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, autonomous delivery will make it much more important as well.
Yes.
And there is one more question. Does this include infrastructure items like door openers?
yeah, like
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah, especially not only door openers for our vehicles, again, whether owned or shared or mass transit, but yeah, absolutely. Like that really brings up this whole idea of total trip, right? Because it's not a complete trip if for example you get out and then you can't access the final destination of where you're going. So thinking about that total trip is absolutely area of opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
and if you think about delivery, also you can think about our door openers, like for like smart like lockers, for example, or purse or any mailbox, for example. How you can make it more accessible to the people with special need, right? Although it is not
Yeah.
high related to mobility, but especially if we're talking about e-pallet, for example, or like delivery robots. Once you have the delivery robot goes to your place, how you're gonna access the food or the drug, right? Like you have also to think about it, right, in this aspect.
Yeah. Yeah, what I'm seeing actually recently is for accessing these delivery robots, it's just like whoever is or having the order just receives an SMS with the code, and you just like can enter the code and get everything from there. And yeah, also like I'm reading a lot about there are now some companies working on delivery robots, so it does not only stop at your the door of your building, for example, like we are working on robots as well that can get to your door. So yeah, the future is
Okay.
all
Yeah.
amazing. It's all accessible, hopefully.
I have a
And
last question
yeah,
to Suzette,
yeah, sure.
if you don't mind. Like, I just want to ask about like what would be the risk of following a technology push approach instead of user-driven approach, like to achieve accessible mobility or inclusive or mobility. Yeah. So, like, if somebody is just highly obsessed with technology and just follow a technology push approach in order to handle the barrier, would this be a good approach, or it's better to think customer from the beginning?
Well, it's a tricky question because you're talking to a global market research, and that's my life. And so, of course, my perspective is always to start with the user and understand their consumer needs and wants. We have a phrase we use often in GM, which is, technology for technology's sake it usually doesn't lead you down the right path. We would say, it's like a technology in search of a customer, where we want the reverse, right? We want to really understand the customer needs and wants, and then develop technologies that solve for those. But having said that, no doubt there are always, for example, we get the question all the time, oh, 5G is here. Okay, what can we use 5G for? What can we use to make our consumers' lives better? So that is a technology in search of a customer, but what it really is, you almost line up your customer needs on one side and then look at the technology as to what can it help solve and what can it help improve upon. So I do think thinking at it from both angles absolutely does lead to innovation and new aha moments. But of course, you can't do one without the other. You definitely have to do your homework and really understand your consumers, their needs, their wants. We do a lot what we call voice of the customer research, where we actually develop a hierarchy of needs, right? Primary needs, secondary needs, tertiary needs. And then we try and take the technologies and look at what technologies can help solve or improve for those needs. Great question.
Also, I have a last question to Shireen, because you are working for AVIN. Do we have any kind of similar initiative, similar to the initiative Suzette mentioned in US, in Canada here, in order to understand, assist, and evaluate the accessibility and the inclusiveness of the mobility sector?
There is nothing that I heard about for accessible mobility. There are many organizations as well, like working on accessible mobility, but like for having initiatives with AVIN, we just like started that with the GM. But yeah, like there are many organizations that we can share information about on the competition webpage as well, if anyone is interested. to learn more about what they are doing.
It would be
And
great.
yeah, of course. Okay, with no more questions and time is almost over, we will conclude the webinar. Thank you, Suzette and Ala, for your time
Thank you.
and the
Thank
great
Thank
you.
you.
insights you shared with us today. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining us. If you are a post-secondary student in Ontario or know a post-secondary student in Ontario, we encourage you and them to register for the student competition. You have until November 1st to register, as Dr. Ala mentioned, but the earlier you register, the more time, of course, you will have to work on your proposed solution. Thank you all once more for joining us today. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.